Have the shows, the competitive shows of the Pierre Verger Award, the ethnographic movie show. In the first time, we have a competitive show for drawings as well. I'm biased to say, but everything is very interesting there. I'd like to invite you once again to go on the website and see the schedule for the shows, and they will be available until the end of the meeting. And the roundtables, as they are happening, they are being broadcast, and they will be embedded later on the website, which will be available. So the conferences for opening and closing and the roundtables will be made available for the website. No further ado. So we start this first table, the field of visual anthropology in Brazil, and I'd like to read some of the proposal for the table. The field of visual anthropology in Latin America is very wide, related to the way the anthropology as an area of academic knowledge is constituted in several countries in the region in the construction of national identities that are very distinct. This roundtable aims at approaching these different stances with professionals coming from several countries as Peru, Colombia, Chile, and Mexico to show the different characteristics and ethnographic approaches, focusing on the view in each country, coming closer and further with contemporary reflections in visual anthropology in Latin America. Gaston Carreno, one of the participants, is not here yet. We hope he does as we're going on. And I'd like to thank to Alonso, Oscar, and Mauricio for accepting the invitation to be here at this roundtable. So thank you, especially because I know in some countries, especially Alonso and Oscar, it's still early morning. So I thank you for your effort for being here with us today. We thought of a dynamics of 15 minutes tops each for some of the presenters, for each of the presenters. And then we will come back for some of my words after the presentations. And then in the end, I will present you as give the floor to you. So we established an order here that first is Alonso, then Oscar, then Gaston. and then Mauricio, I'm sorry, and in the end, Gaston. So we'll start now with Alonso Quinteros. I'll present you. If Mauricio and Oscar would like to turn your camera off, that's okay. We'll be right back with you. And then I'll present Alonso. Alonso Quintero Melendez is a professor at Masters in Visual Anthropology in the Catholic University in Peru. Research regional cinemas in Peru from the perspective that intertwines the performance theory with ethnography in cinema. He's also a researcher in history, in documentaries in Peru, and videosphere in contemporary Peru. He promotes the research on Peruvian documentaries, and he's developing this project, Arquivo Documentario Peruano. And I thank you for being here, and you have the floor. Thank you. I don't know if you can hear me. I thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here in this meeting. This promotes us to get to know better each other. So I'll start now my presentation. In fact, from recent experience I had, and I'll tell you some issues about visual anthropology in Latin America. I'll go on with my presentation. There's a wide array of academic experiences in Latin America, from local circumstances and disciplinary openings. They have been developed from studies programs, research nuclei, study focus, teaching areas, consolidation of oratories, a long way of work, publications of several magazines, journals, to develop social media as well. Some spaces had difficulties from the anthropologic discipline field. They have been seen as ethnographic work disciplines, not as a building of the anthropologic knowledge, but from artistic practices, visual digital arts, experimenting with several methodologies. They have been developing regionally and internationally within the anthropologic discussions and work groups from several congresses, meetings, such as international universities, and ALA itself, the Latin American Anthropology Associations, just to mention a few, as we see in different seminars and meetings in a national level as well. For Peru and Ecuador, there are master's programs in the audiovisual anthropology that are being developed with several themes that correspond to the work lines that I mentioned in the beginning. These master's programs are in a postgraduate level, in a Latin American level, but there's a wide array in masters being developed in production means focusing on community work, collaborative project initiatives, workshops, and also popularization initiatives for this type of knowledge in several countries and all the regions in the country. In Brazil's case, you know more than me, but it has been consolidated in several research nuclei, in several universities focusing on wide knowledge in national level, in building of a knowledge, and the knowledge that is going on for a long time, and also promotes what congregates us in this occasion and several other events of this type that made possible for us to build these bonds. It's important with these events that we get together often that we did in the masters in Lima to bring some issues for the debate. As part of the activities celebrating the 10 years of the master's program, we organized a seminar with Balance and Future seminar was carried out in December 2019. It was several international meetings that were organized in 2014 and congregated several specialists in visual anthropology in Latin America to talk about the objectives and challenges. And the interest was to problematize the diversity of visual anthropology with debates in geographic uh, borders and also in disciplines. To compile this work, we changed a lot of publications. In the near future, we can see the identity of visual anthropology in Latin America. We have been teaching with professors like Juliana Moreira. We also need to fragment that production is wide, but in this presentation, I'd like to highlight some aspects that have been carried out in the work, some problems that are common to all the discussions, and also see the experience of the visual identity in this case. On the first level, we question the singular character of the denomination of visual anthropology. We can see the plurality of this identity in Latin America, and also the singularity that some lines that intertwine and some that have their own way as a fragmented character with a colonial history that is still present today. It puts us in a peripheral condition in the global flow. They reinforce the feeling of being part of the unit, but in practice, we observe that the connections with the knowledges that compose the region are frail and timely. In the last decade, we observed initiatives that could indicate the flow in the region. As I said about the master's program, academic exchange, carrying out of international seminars and publications that congregate colleagues and students in Latin America. There are answers that need to be sought, the way we teach, the language in which we publish. It's interesting now because we have the possibility of having simultaneous interpretation in Portuguese, Spanish, and English. And the way we do that institutionally and the resources we can count on, the scripts and the possibilities with our students, and also the need to question the disciplinary doing when we are talking about a global understanding. In visual anthropology field, the perspective in Latin America is concomitant with the politics because it has been influenced by exchange policies and artistic production for photography as a study of visual anthropology express the politics focusing on theory and methodological experimentation. In Latin America, the commitment and of the chain and the multidisciplinary sector of this chain is a wide field of anthropology. One of the most important contributions of Latin America is exploration of forests and the citizenship policies that are explored as being uneven. Visual anthropology in Latin America participates in debates of the concrete parts effectively in a social world that constitutes unevenness, but also a means of resisting in future.
Iniciativas tomadas para poner los archivos y museos.
So the initiatives taken to have the archives on the museums being used to work on the defense of history is constituting an interesting international politics scenario with community experiences and dynamics as they happen in a positive way and also with access to the archive, photographs, statements, personal objects, etc. As archive practices related to that, the use of the archive as part of the discussion in case of artistic production, which shows the necessity of discussing, which is analyzed as an international issue and banalization of violence. Technologies that are being used acquired the ascension in the field of visual anthropology. It was very important to open the way to bonds that can be done through methodological experimentation. The pandemic crisis made an important role not only in the interest of the practices repertoire, but also generation of knowledge. The experience in the pandemic opened the path to new types of researches that we are incorporating and problematizing in the research practices. One of the main contributions of visual anthropology in the wider field of anthropology is the opening of new lines of study and experimentation, not only for the recent worry of digital circulation, but the incorporation of methodologies that are accessible for professors and students. Several investigation lines with recent interests have been developed with perspectives in the visual anthropology area with long way to go. A wide array of not only documental production, but also study and material documentation, and also practices that introduce visual anthropology. Through photograph and visual archives used in different themes in contemporary documental ways. I could talk about my work, but I could also talk about what I'm doing in the near future. Also, an investigation line for art proposal and methodology with several publications have been made. In the research of social media and internet, with intertwine the use of photographs, videos in different platforms, in movement on the internet, as the role that is being played by video games in young people experience for gender identity and different practices. This open perspective of different media and technology is breaking the barrier of registry and the construction of new anthropological knowledge in computers and information. This is the challenge of visual anthropology since the beginning because there's something bigger in the Latin American interest with collaboration of several actors, agencies, on a way of looking at public spheres and cultural spheres as galleries and cultural spaces in collaboration with artists and collective activists in different social struggles. The experience in the inversion nucleus in the masters that are constituted in the workshops of formations and production collectives, different events that build national levels in Latin America show great strength as the perspective for visual anthropology in Latin America. The emphases are different, fragmented, and the teachers level, the professors level research gives dynamic aspects to anthropology. So there's a way still to go in the knowledge of several experiences, in the development of possibilities of joint initiatives and the consolidation of networks in Latin America. I hope that in this brief presentation I have contributed to the debate and to be able to share with different experiences. Thank you.
Alonso, obrigada então pela tua fala
Alonso,
instigante.
thank
Enfim,
you.
eu vou passar diretamente aqui para o Oscar,
I'll give the
né?
floor to Oscar now.
A gente vou fazer uma apresentação. Então, Oscar Guarim Martins é
So
professor
Oscar Guarem
associado
Martins
do
is
Departamento de
associated
História e
professor in the
coordenador do Sense
history
Lab, laboratório de
department and
experimentação da
coordinator of
Faculdade
Sense
de
Lab in
Ciências
the
Sociais
experimentation
da
lab in
Pontifícia
the
Universidade Javeriana
social
da Colômbia. É doutor em Ciências Sociais pela
college
Universidade da
in
Unicamp,
Colombia.
né?
He's a
Pela
professor at
FAPESP
Unicamp
e é pesquisador
and
associado
FAPESP
também do
and
Laboratório
also associated
Antropológico de Geracionais do
researcher
Lágrima,
in the
também é da
anthropological
Unicamp.
lab
Seu
in
campo de
Unicamp.
pesquisa trata da potência das
His field of
imagens e as suas
research
relações com
talks about the
tecnologias e
potence of
artes.
images and relationship with
Obrigado, Oscar,
technologies,
novamente aí
arts,
por
and
estar com a
thinking.
gente. Te passo a
Thank you,
palavra.
Oscar, for being with us. You have the floor.
Obrigado, Vitor. Muchas
Thank you.
gracias a todos, al comité organizador, a Fabiana, a Ina,
Thank
a
you,
Vitor por la
everyone, for the
invitación,
organizing
a
committee,
Luque, a Virginia.
Javi, all for this
Yo quisiera
invitation,
hacer
for
una
being here.
presentación
I'd like
a
to
partir
talk
de
about
algunos trabajos. Realmente va a ser un
coming from
trabajo que
some
es
works.
parte de otro acervo más grande
It-
sobre el
It's a
archivo
work that is
y sobre
part
las
of something
relaciones del
bigger
retorno en las
about
imágenes, que es
the
algo que ha
archives
empezado a surgir
and
recientemente.
about the
Entonces, en esta
return that
presentación me
is
gustaría
starting to appear.
abordar
So, in
algunas
this presentation,
cuestiones
I would like
relacionadas
to
con el
approach
trabajo
different issues
sobre imágenes de pueblos
related
indígenas y el
to
archivo
work I've been
audiovisual.
doing about
En
image
primer
with the
lugar,
indigenous people and the
partiendo de los
archive that I have.
archivos
First of
audiovisuales y
all,
experimentales que tomaron
I'd like to
como
go
base el
from some
archivo audiovisual
audiovisual
sobre la
works
Amazonía, registrado
that
a
are
comienzos del
part
siglo
of the
XX.
visual
Y
archive
en
of
segundo
the
lugar,
Amazon,
una reflexión
registered
sobre el
in the
propio
beginning of
archivo,
the 20th
sus
century,
usos y
and
sus
then
posibles
reflect on the
destinos.
archive,
Entonces
its
quisiera pedirles
uses,
a
and
uno
its
por uno
possible
de pasar,
destinations.
vamos a ver un
So I'd
pequeño
like to
video
ask
y
for a
luego
favor by
hablaremos
Bruno
de
to play a little video and then I'll talk about it.
Cuida escoda. Que água escoda. Eu não te dirá. Mare. Bom, missioni. Escoda né? Escoda né? Aule. Irá com gudo. Aí. Irá com gudo. Já é meio codo. Que é merur. Ih. Carta.
Bien, debo decir que a propósito de estas piezas
Well,
experimentales de
what I would like to
cuál es
say
la
is the
primera muestra,
purpose
nunca
of
fue
these experimental pieces are a little show that has never had the meaning of being something simple, but the result is something specific that are among our pieces and a series of visual notes. They allowed us to think about the destination of the images. So it started with experimenting with these images to see what would happen. So I asked myself, what could be the meaning of these experiences of revealing the meaning of these images and the narratives that were in our archives. So this exercise led me to thinking about ethnography and the way the regime was carried out in the place of whistleblowing in almost invisible to witness the other's life, almost always exotic and forced by the images being captured. And with the putting together of this material, let me think that they would be put together and analyzed to see what happened in these processes and helped me write the text as well. The work with the images was to transcend the representation of what was shown, of how, what, when, why, made in the documenting of the archive. The objective was to enter frame by frame and watch it and start to research other aspects that are in there or that are not there anymore, asking how these images are registry not only of peoples and cultures, but of everyday moments and explore the multiple possibilities of understanding their way of life. And when I proposed myself to analyze these sequences of images and I tried to understand what was behind this movement, what was the meaning of the way these images were put together. And it's obvious that we need to observe that the capture of these images, there are different power relations that in some way are at the place. The attempt of fracturing these images would be transformations of identities that are independent, that are not articulated anymore in the original meaning they had. So what I was looking for was being able to show another meaning of these images, always understanding the building of knowledges in several possible processes. And when I tried to break these meanings of these images that were established, in the end, we produced another meaning. The will of doing something with the images is not only a way of making them independent. Every time we do something, something happens. So it's interesting how the putting together of this image also becomes politics, because with this image articulation, there is an alternative goal, not only the procedure of looking at and selecting images, but there's also an event going on. And it's the process of putting together, and this is key. In this breaking of of the images, I understood different things as ruins of a fragment of a theme that is no longer, and fragments of little ruins. And in this sense, is when the fragmentation of the image happens that generates other things. I worked with the times of the images. I thought about the polychromy. I removed them from the physical place they were and I started moving them. So making the archive active is a way to instigate movement and make other questions arise. In this process, I met Russian poets with watching more recent cinematic montages, and with Dutch archives, with colonial archives, and seen in other ways. And also the critical chamber that diminishes the potential of the images, which allows us to go in and hold time still and observe. And thinking about the objective of the montage, and it converted not only in putting images together, but also a procedure of producing thinking. The procedure of putting together also opens ways and produces knowledge. And in a concrete way, it opens thinking when you establish a timeline and think we are trying to produce grammar. There are figures, metaphors, analogies. And these processes that happen produce a grammar of measurement. In this video I showed, there are stereotypes and part of what could be shown as anthropology, but it's a fragment that was made by a dentist on a trip to the Amazon in 1953. It goes into the stereotype, and because of how long the take is and the time, it makes the spectator being what is being observed. When we see the observer in first person, it's very impressive because it's an inversion. We are being observed by it and finding out that that image, that woman that is lying on the hammock, widen the meaning that of this inversion of who is observing who. Some from different archives in British Partner and Brazilian Cinematheque. These archives were created from scientific experiments and registries made by engineers that made some constructions over there and brought the camera as part of the work. I analyzed some alternative circuits of movies, and also the production in Brazil. The archive is very wide in this meaning. And in Brazil, I found a lot of Amazon archives, and I had little here in Colombia. And what was interesting to me was something that I found, one of the few records that were made in Colombia and Amazon. Something that impressed me since the beginning is what is made available in the universities that make efforts to preserve them and are also owners of the rights. In other words, the indigenous peoples are not owners of these archives. They never even had access to them. If they had access, it was fragmented. There's an issue of requesting permission to not only the indigenous authorities, but the museum administrators. So these images were stolen, just as the wood and the rubber and the animals themselves. In other words, these images are symptoms of an extraction and exploration system. The indigenous communities in the Amazon are objects of images and are not subject in them. There's something interesting about this work, is that it's related with the reception and return of these archives to the communities. So Professor Silvia's work as an archaeology teacher about the evolution process presented in the file, in the first images made in Brazil. So they presented the film Mato Grosso in the Tadarimana village. The movie was captured in 1938 with an expedition by the Pennsylvania University and was exhibited 80 years later in the community. The interest for animals is one of the issues. It talks about the evolution process. The people being filmed, the shaman, chief, was also identified. And it's very interesting in this process to highlight expeditions that could happen with these images when they are given back to the peoples that were object in them. This is something very uneasy. In images that are greater than what we have thought. The Colombian Amazon, somebody asked the grandmother if they could record healing treatment for this person who is being treated could be seen. And they said, no, it doesn't work like that. Cure is something else. Of course, it's something beyond that. It's related to everything that happens in the process, what is triggered with the healing process. This also happens with images. In several indigenous peoples, the images are uneasy and even damaging. This happened with images to colonize our language. Among the Yanomamis, when something died, they erase everything. The memory of this person is erased. We can't erase a dead person because they are no longer there. This is a memory meaning that is very different than ours. This is interesting, so we can analyze these different relationships with these indigenous people with the images. They can offer. Someone is surprised because the production of images of indigenous peoples in several cases can be, as in the Colombian case, they're using Western narratives. And it brings the question up about what do the images request from us. I think this is a level of colonization of these images. Decolonize is a word that is still a little uneasy for me. I think we should spread them so they can do whatever they need or that they want. This is important because the image generates the verb. To conclude, I'd like to share an image that is an audiovisual sequence in anthropologist Paulo Moura and is being finalized. He had a huge impact over me when I saw it. The consecrating of the cameras and the recording equipment before they were used. This ritual that is established with the use of technology, the automation of this could be seen as a way of decolonizing technology. It's not only talking about the camera and making the registry something that was installed in the looks, and there's no longer this relationship with the machine, no longer the device that we use the image. There's a different force acting over this, such as cure, for an example. One could think about images as living beings, as cyborgs, as narrating several entities that are alive, that have matter, and are technology at the same time, which are also a soul. It's important in the way of decolonizing these words as making them alive and activating them as they are. So the decolonization of these images and the structure of its use in the narrative forms and the use that are given to these images. These are topics that we are not very knowledgeable about. With the technology that we have today, we can have images of anything, absolutely all the moments that are going on. And what happens is that we are producing an infinite archive, but we're not seeing the images, we're just adding them to the archives. So we can later look at them, and sometimes we even look at them actually. So this is what I had for today. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for your speech. So now we'll give the floor to Mauricio. He is coming. Mauricio, I'll introduce you. I didn't know you were calling me. So he's a photographer and translator. He's a doctor in anthropology. He's more than 40 years researching in social, environmental, intercultural education and visual anthropology, and working with aesthetics. And he taught in several higher education institutions in Mexico and coordinates the audiovisual lab in the CIESAS. He's also a member of the Social Studies and Environment, the Audiovisual Research Network in the CIESAS, in the Morelos State in Mexico. Thank you for accepting the invitation. You have the floor. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So let's share a screen here. So as the images come, I'll talk about them. First, I would like to say that I'm not the most indicated person in Mexico to talk about Latin America. I have relatively small time working with this. I think as the Colombians say, en el ajo. So this invitation was lovely, and I accepted, and I recognize, first of all, my lack of knowledge about the reflection of visual anthropology, as I think it is appropriate to be named. I've been working with this, I've been heading the lab for only 3 years, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. And I'll talk about what we can show here. I don't think you can see it yet. I want to base my speech on these two great thinkers that I recommend you to read in the future. Mauricio, I'm sorry. I only see the white screen. I don't know if you shared your screen. Yes, I'm sharing, but everything is white. Can't you see the picture? No, we can't. I'll try again, just a moment. Yeah, it's strange that you can't see the picture. Now can you see it? Yes, now we can. I'm sorry for the time loss. Well, I'll start talking about these reflections, and I'll try to talk about visual anthropology from the anthropological point of view. So let's go to full screen, and you tell me if you have the full. Can you see the full screen? Yes, yes. Some from these reflections that you can see, we lack rectification, adjustments. There are zones in history that have not been revealed yet to me. The first by Jorge Luis Borges. There are two Argentinian thinkers talking about what we see, what we feel could be partial from depending on the point of view. This is what it means. So I'll guide you through the presentation, and this is what I'll talk about. I'm not talking from truth. I seek not to say truth, but making a version that it looks truthful to you because they're factual and plausible part with logical argumentation. And the elements that I will mention today are an approximation of what I understand and what we are seeking to promote at CSS and in larger scale in Mexico and in audiovisual, which is the value of the historical and heritage context. And as we're doing in visual anthropology in Mexico. And then I'll talk about what looks as constitutive to me in Latin America, in the audiovisual context, in audiovisual labs. I made a little research here on audiovisual labs in Mexico. And finally, I'll talk about what we're doing at CSS and in the audiovisual lab that is not necessarily the same thing. So just a moment. I'm a little confused with the screen changing. I'm sorry. There we are. Oh, there. I'm sorry. I don't know where I am. I'm sorry. We're all white again. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, okay? I apologize because this is, I always fumble when I do these things. First, I'd like to talk to you about something that it's important to talk about art and audiovisual anthropological sciences. I think anthropology by itself is not only a knowledge field, but also has expression forms, and we have the right to incorporate these modalities of art, of what we understand as art, and to deepen the management of forms beyond the process. In this way, a little more to the bottom, the field of visual anthropology, it seems to me that it goes from the senses, as hearing and vision, to the constructs, what we can understand as sound and image. If you want sound and image and audiovisual, that is another way of putting it. This is not about, I'm a parenthesis here, about dichotomy. It's about showing the phenom amplitude of what we are trying to build here. And in this way, as the picture on the left shows, I don't know how many of you recognize this or remember the concert the Beatles gave at the rooftop. Talking about people who heard it live or relived through the movie with the documentary series. It was music, right? But for other people, it was noise. It was downtown London, was disturbing people. Not only the ambiguity, but the interpretation issue. What Oscar said about posture. And the picture on the right is a picture that shows this eye, and it looks. I try to show the way we are seen and we see through this type of image that we show, not anything less than the vision organ. This is so we can see the amplitude of audiovisual world. The issue of the bird that are bringing memories, and with the words used, Pablo Rulfo, son of Juan Rulfo, that I met by accident in a meeting, and he told me, Mexicans, we don't even know how rich we are, of the heritage we have. So I bring this saying that it's important for me to talk about visual anthropology of visual production, audiovisual production in a national level. It's important for us to understand that there's a lot of baggage behind that. And as we can say from top to bottom, left to right, the images here are parallel with the forms that we have, something historical, something very knowledgeable, and something present that is happening right now and will be valid, and it's being done by anthropologists. So on the left, we have a pictography, and we have the Mid-American codexes. We can see the codex of which the national emblem comes from. We can see on the top left the Mexican flag, but this is also, we can see the development of this pictography, this work that's being done by Hendrickson, that is done by this person that everybody knows so well. On the right, talking about music, instead of choosing a mariachi picture that also has place here, but if you want to talk about more of older examples, Guapango is a classic written by Juan Pablo Moncayo, and I'd like you to listen to it because it talks about this specific Mexico in this extraordinary piece of work. We have our dear colleague here, Gabriela Cecina. She studied noise. She works in the Autonomous University of Yucatan, and she's dedicated to studying downtown and how the discotheques at night, they end up having influence in local life. They're pleasant to one and unpleasant to another. It's a very interesting way of dealing with audio, and we're going to talk about that as well. On the right, we also have a picture. It's one of the best photographers we can see anywhere, which is Graciela Torbide. who has great images. And on the side, we have the work of our colleague that talks about the revelation. And we have the continuous of the work here. On the top, on the bottom left, I think everybody knows this woman. This is a huge movie star in Mexico. And on the right, we have Mrs. Batalla, which in the 60s and 70s made the first modern ethnographic movies. And also Arturo Barma, who is a Mexican anthropologist. We have on the right here as well. There's beautiful ladies. Both of them have different pictures. Elena Poniatowska is a great writer. She was awarded with the Cervantes Award. This is the highest literature award for the Spanish languages. She has beautiful texts about women, which is around 20, 25 years old, I believe. This beautiful text. And on her right, we have Teresa Carbo, who analyzes the current visual discourse. Not necessarily she does photography, but from Planting of John Berger, which are classics, she elaborates the interpretation way, and it's suggestive that because it works with the images and with the direction and organization of the bodies and with the looks, to be able to criticize the interpretation of the image. We have all this heritage, and it's based, it's present, and it's very active, and any audiovisual anthropologist can come and open this treasure box that could also be a Pandora's box from the look. So now I'll talk a bit about the functionality in a way of seeing the visual anthropology as an institution that's very active in the Mexican society. So I believe we are including audio. On the right, we see pictures of the last meeting we had here. And the topic here in bold is the composition of the 6th meeting in San Cristobal de las Casas. It was just now in June and July this year. We see one of the tables here and also the audience that participated. It's something that called my attention here, organizing and helping organizing this meeting. This is an autonomous sector that is independent of documentarists and photographers, which works outside of the academy. I think it's very important for this group to exist because they have own initiatives, they are self-governed. But there's an institutional sector, and I still haven't seen initiatives in universities that could do something like that. I've seen something mixed, working with autonomous sectors as institutional sectors. And this video project goes through the south border, and it's coordinated by Xochileva in the southwest and Acercoller They work with local rural communities, creating projects. I think this is very important because it generates a lot of results. I'd like to highlight this Victor Turner reflection, which is dramas, fuels, and metaphors, and talks about the importance of marginality. So we are not there. He highlights that marginality or periphery, culturally speaking, it's a matter of positioning that could easily change and occupy the center. So I'd like to highlight here the emergence of rock and roll in the world, or reggae in the world, popular music, thanks to the music industry that they produced in Kingston and in London, and then they widened. And part of multinational companies are participating in that, but coming from a marginal position. Not necessarily marginal is a position pre-established and it is forever. We have to see the creativity here in the marginal. So on the bottom part of the slide, we have part of the discussion that we had in San Cristobal, which are the cases. I'm sorry, my Peruvian colleague, I don't remember your name, but it's very important what you were saying. The discussion of what are the collaborative discussions, what are the rights of the author and the spectator. These are terms that everybody here knows well, I believe, but where has been established for the interaction for different actors that participate in the construction and the elaboration of the audiovisual project. And in the end, there's something that looks important to me that I think we do have to discuss, is the necessity of alphabetizing audiovisual material in our society, in our academia. There's a difficult for management, understanding, and at the same time, there's huge duality of these directions that look very important to understand. Speaking from my professor point of view, but it's fundamental for us to break this prejudice. I'm sorry, Professor. Can you conclude, because we have little time? I'd like to show the panorama of audiovisual anthropology. We have 6 audiovisual production units, 6 labs. We have 7 of 8 archives, substantive tasks. We all do research, we all teach, and in the master's and doctorate, there's only one formative investigation line. We all divulge the work and communicate. Here we created an internal network of audiovisual investigations. We are doing the substantive tasks and also making products. This huge work, hard and difficult, especially in austerity times with our current government. And here we have the lab work that we understand that in each year we do this festival dedicated to Afro-descendant peoples with activism and art in a way that is also very didactic. And we work with social diversity projects supported by Mexico government. Thanks to Mariana Femen, my Colombian colleague. We're learning to work in different fronts because it's a terrible process. It's a process to be overcome, the prejudice focused on how little relevant visual anthropology can be in Mexico. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Mauricio, for your speech. And now we'll go to our last guest on the table, Eston Carreno. Hello, Gaston. How are you? I thank you for accepting our invitation. I'll introduce you, okay? Gaston Carreno is a social anthropologist with diploma in cultural journalism and doctorate in Latin American studies by the Chile University. And the main research lines are studies of photography and cinema with indigenous peoples and coast groups and whale hunting. His postgraduate work was developed in different Chilean and foreign universities, and is the coordinator of the Study Center for Visual Anthropology and director of a very famous journal, which is the Chilean Journal of Visual Anthropology, which he coordinated until 2016. So welcome, and you have the floor. Thank you. First of all, I'm really sorry. I work with art and heritage, and we have a lot of work here. We have a lot of chaos here. So I connected through my mobile phone, so it's not very good. I'll ask Bruno to help me with the presentation. I'm prepared to show the images. So I'll go straight to the point because I'm late already. So Bruno, we are starting here. Thank you. Next, please. Well, the title here, I'll talk about visual anthropology in Chile from my experience in visual anthropology. And what is important, since the 4 years I've been working with the state, the National Service for Cultural Heritage with the Cultural Ministry, Arts and Heritage, with sub-direction of research that we are developing linked to visual anthropology. First, I would like to talk about is the look from where I'm looking. I don't want to be arrogant or talking about visual anthropology in Chile. And I'm talking from my experience in visual anthropology, is that in the old days, we used to call it particularly about the digital that removed these shortcuts, that there was an international practice focusing on Latin America. And in this sense, since I'm here at this place where I work, we reissued the journal. And in the journal's point of view, this is learning of a way of observing the experimental changes of the audiovisual archive. This visual anthropology network. In the first year in 2000, I'm a privileged observer of all the developments that the internet had at that time. And in fact, the journal started being converted in archive in a way. And I'll talk about my experience as researcher and the use of image in my investigation work. So this is the cover of the first issue of the visual journal. we have always been a digital format. People say we are visionaries, but this is a response to lack of funding. We didn't have the money to print, but this was recent in also in Latin America, were digital versions of printed journals. So we went with this format, going full digital. We were the first ones in Chile to do that. The second issue that you see here, I'm sorry, this is an image of number 5 cover. The technical resources to how to enter the. This is from 2005. There were 4 or 5 editors. There was one artist and very few resources. And we were very eager for the project. We were in love. So it ended up working out. But we are closer to Chile, and we thought about, we have a little more maturity now thinking about the journal. In this slide, you can see the indications that Chile gave us as a way to inform the aesthetics of the journal. And in fact, this coincided of launching it within a journal, and we edited in audiovisual resources with which we issued a lot of them. You can see the last one here. I'd like to go deeper in the meeting with Alonso. I've been here with you, I'm sorry. The one we issued with the Peruvian Catholic University. We had several issues with regional universities in the last year in Latin America per se. And we did with Peru. We also did with University of Cali, and also with the coordinator with of indigenous accomplishers. Let's go to the next slide, please. Since 2020, we are launching the new version of the journal with a series of aesthetic resource limitations, because it has to comply with ministry aesthetics, but it's functional. We are issuing number 30, what we are editing currently, and it implies that once an article is published, before August and December, and now as they are getting ready, they are issued. And this slide is another project that we are doing in parallel, also related to anthropology. This is a book that is being printed on the day after tomorrow. This is the first re-edition of articles in the audiovisual anthropology archives. We are re-editing articles from the first issue. This is where we talk about being privileged observers. In the year 2000, there was no PDF, or at least it wasn't so famous. We used to download it in Word. And when you download it in Word format, it used to lose all the configuration. The connectivity was never good. It was very slow. We had to work with low resolution images, low quality, so it wouldn't be so heavy. And in a way, this was something that was hard for us because we had technical limitations. And we ended up repairing all this, re-editing the archives. This is one of the images that we're studying in this article, are being edited now. This is an article I wrote that until today there's no author, because the part where it says who the author is was lost. So it circulates without authorship. It's a photography of an indigenous person done in a French expedition with a naturalistic research. Main objective was to make a measure in South America. When I saw this photograph, I was able to discuss the erotic character in the indigenous photograph, where supposedly it was ethnographic. Here we have a photograph that is very important of two professors. Where the PDF version will be available for you. And this is the ethnographer and the person who works in the field. We have more than 30 images. And the idea here is that there is a dialogue with ethnography. It's interesting as well. The first issue of the Visual Anthropology journal, this image was very bad quality, but he had the original slide. So we had a scanner, we scanned this picture. This is a tradition that is getting lost here. This is the bait that is made for fishing. And this picture shows the construction of a pole for fishing. The second part of my showing here is related to visual archive. There'll be another table who will go into detail. It's 22 years that I've seen the visual anthropology. It's important to reflect about the analog to digital transformation of photographs, videos. You see, in the year 2000, it was very hard to watch a movie on the internet. Today we see in 4K with huge qualities. I was talking to an author the other day, with an author that sent a teaser of a video, and the quality is beautiful. When we compare with something that we had before, it was a whole different level of quality. So this made me reconceptualize the audiovisual archive. The development of internet and the quality of the files, the image, and the possibility of uploading videos is something that, seen from the perspective, is very interesting. Generations that grew up with broadband and the internet, but in fact, I'm from a generation that saw this being implemented. So in the case of the Ministry of Culture, the logic of administration and massification of image is something that we recommend, which is www.memoriachilena.cl. You can find photographs and old books. This is a beautiful work in Latin America. It's done by state support. It's made to document and offer images to the public. Oscar was talking about that. Let's talk about the ownership rights. If on one hand we have this array of openings to be done in digital archives, we see that there's also the interest of getting this image. It's very weird because the way it's done, first everything was open and then everything was closed. So we have to think about this subject. So this is why I'd like to mention here as a huge subject. any right, someone will end up making profit with someone else's images. What I was talking about, saving the image in a museum. Here we have an image of what the archives are that the Cultural Heritage Service offers. A lot of images can be downloaded. I don't know if I can send you the link here so the organization can publicize it. It's an attempt of digitalizing the images. In this slide, we have materials such as this, perspective, colored pictures. Here we see a Maputi youngling, which is a term that is almost disappeared. This is a picture from, these are pictures from a different museum. First, we have a lot of material. Next slide, please. For example, here we have this in the current issue cover in the borders of the Amazon. This is reminiscent of a Quechua community in Chile. It's a series of photographs that were taken in the exploration. I think they were close to a volcano, something about sulfur. This was an exploration picture, and this is one of the oldest things that this museum possesses. Here show a work that has just been published and is related to this photograph. These photographs appeared on a book about the armed forces. In the captions, the photograph says, young indigenous called Chanimas. This type of photograph for many, let's say, was very important because it was the first photograph of these indigenous people in the north coast of Chile, of which there are not many pictures. But not only the caption of this photograph, here it was part of an exhibition, a permanent exhibition in the Regional Museum of Northern Chile. And when I saw this photograph in 2008 and when it started circulating, it looked not certain of being Chango, because the naturalist travelers of 19th century used it to show these people as dressed as the countryside people from Chile. And when I was able to investigate further, I reached the conclusion of the source. The photograph is actually a Philippines native, and we don't know how it ended up in this book. We saw that there were other photographs that were not associated correctly, and this was actually a Philippine that posed as Django. Here we have the rights for this famous photograph. Maybe it's National Geographic, and this photograph ended up with American administration. When they occupied the Philippines, the governor had an obsession with photographs, and in this context he made a report of why they used this type of coverage, and as they worked with clay. And coming towards the end of my presentation, I'd like to talk quickly about the ethnographic practice of the photographs I'm working on now. I'm working with materials in Chile. It's a practice that allowed me to develop methodology that my master called past challenges ethnography, because whales are not being hunted anymore. I was doing ethnography of an event that was not happening anymore and was linked to study. Now I'm working with Atacama fishermen, because it's interesting because it's a mining zone in northern Chile, and it's a mine exploration zone in the country. So there's a long fishing tradition in this area actually, and I made a archive photographic line. This is an archive of a National Heritage Service that donated several photographs. These are from the 50s. Very interesting material, raising information. For example, in the back here, we see that it was an area that this dive was taking place. And we see here they were fishing for this crustacean. Here we see a way of organizing the hooks with the baits. We see two fish heads, as I interpreted something that would be thrown out, but they told me it's a type of fish from the area. And they used it to make a soup, a very flavorful soup. So it was not to be thrown out. Here we can see the port that is called Calneres, which is a big city today. The development of the city with the direct link to fishing. We used to cut and sell swordfish. Here we see an old fisherman, Andre Roja, one of the first fishermen. I have a record of his father in 1925 delivering fish to this shop called Candela. And it's also a research line that was developed in the early fishing industry, where the production of the artisanal fishermen was being bought. We're talking about 1925. Fish, clams. So in this area, it was the first train in Chile, I believe one of the first in Latin America. So there was the specific economic development in this area. Here's his brother. I had very interesting conversation with him. This is a photograph from the buco camera. I do ancient ethnography. I'm not old enough, young anymore to carry a video camera. So this is the picture I use. There's some audio and filming difficulties, but we will edit a 5-minute documentary with this material, because I think the GoPro camera helps a lot in a lab point of view. There was an American lab that made a sensory research. There is an American film made with the GoPro, and it shows that it fulfills the work. we were fishing here. It's a seasonal fish called dorado. This is a photographic production I'm doing. For several years, I worked with video and left photographs for the background. There was a change in format. Cameras were being substituted with memory cards. It's a lot of change. I continue with my photographic camera. I come from a photographer's family. My great grandparents, and I'm in fact the fourth generation that breaks the circle because I dedicated to visual anthropology, but my family is very connected to photography. Next slide, please. So I finish and we can think about what is left for the final session, the difficulties of keeping the anthropology journal in this horizon of journals and computers in a very complicated universe to survive in. The anthropologists used to say that academic activism is still resisting with the journal, and the digital archives, the data preference, and the issuing of the book with the research of the northern fishermen. We will do make a mini documentary with a GoPro camera. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gaston. So I believe as mediator is up to me. I will not do the debate itself, but commentary of some issues that were based on your speeches, so we can have some closure here. Mauricio and Alonso, if you want to turn on your cameras, we can be everybody here for the end. I'd like to thank you all. It's very stimulating. We have to talk among us more and more in the construction of what we call the visual anthropology field in Latin America. But we know that this is a name that marks realities for all levels. And in the field of anthropology itself in Brazil, it's continental. We have a lot of people, as you know. We have several different lines. But I think Alonso started talking a little about what is this notion of visual anthropology. And it's interesting to think about methodological perspectives and academic. They have emphasized the exchange of a more centered perspective on what image is and what has been the audiovisual since the beginning. Many journals and national associations have changed for this perspective that is multimodal, as we say, as the tables have set very clear. New digital technologies have set very wide array of possibilities in the field. Anthropology has not been shy in using these technologies, talking about ethnographic expression. So this is interesting. Something else that grabbed my attention, and I'd like to talk a little about Alonso's speech said about the peripheral condition. Roberto Cardoso de Oliveira, the Brazilian anthropologist, he talks about peripheral anthropologies and talking about the general point of view. They are not marked by the canon of what they called central anthropology. So it ends up with a style inversion, what he sees as positive. And it's interesting to see how several styles in propositions in visual anthropology can construct as we ended up not being stabilized as something that is taken as more central anthropology. In this way, not by accident, many of the presentations, we have this idea of the social and political commitment established by our research in this visual anthropology field. And these commitments also orient the guide, the expressive and ethnographic practices in the visual anthropology and multimodal field. I think this is worth mentioning. With this political commitment also unfolds in a series of methodological issues. Yeah, again, referring to what has crossed not only by reflexivity and how it is taught, but also to authorship and what can be claimed as authorship. In some way, this hesitates, it non-operational. This author function, to use the term, it's not enough because it's something that's very common in visual anthropology. Research that are in some way collaborative, and this rightful notion. In what way authorship is not so clear anymore when we in fact come from several presuppositions in this collaborative multimodal visual anthropology. Something else that was very present is archives. Obviously, this is something that mobilized not only visual anthropology and multimodal, but more general field. There are some names that were being cited here. There are some other classic names in this discussion. They want to change the emphasis to use the terms, the archive as source, to the archive as subject, but to way of think of an archive as a constructor of reality, but not only as a mirror, as a pure and simple representation of something that is already given, but a constructor of worlds, but not in the only in the visual anthropology field. I always remember this Dana Haraway old work when in the teddy bear she shows the visual devices of the museum. They are informing their normativity in applying this normativity in the family point of view to this said natural universe. This discussion of archives also allow us to make this conversation with issues that are in other fields, but not only in the production of images, more focused in the museum issues that again are in many of the speeches. Another issue that is being worked with by many of the authors is the montage issue. To coming out of this discussion, I loved your movie, Oscar. I'd like to see it later, see it again later. Something almost classic with a dialectic montage, with the person being unclothed, the fruit. There's an Eisenstein exercise. And it reminds me some of the classics of visual anthropology. Trogan Cricket by Kibea, this parallel construction of the narrative from the montage. And again, talking about the montage, some authors works with that in anthropology. I wrote an article with Carolina with dialectics and montage in theater, and how it serves as a model for experimentation, not only in audiovisual, but in ethnographic writing. The reference work with no doubt Michael Towson's work, the idea of montage to have another ethnographic writing with words and not lights, but it's in a way operating this place of experimentation. I would also like to talk about I mean, it does not have an intention of being a movie, but what your collocation proposes, we have to think, what is a movie? In an ethnographic way that was very important, were researchers and movie makers understand that it's not what we thought it would be. Our notion of films, when it's in contact with this other notion, which is appropriating of indigenous cultures, this provocation of what is and what is not film, it brings us to this place. On one hand, we have the indigenous film, and on the other hand, we have other procedures. The procedures we are traditionally seeing more as art. There's a last production that I was part of with Paulo Mendo from the Stronger project. It was awarded by APA as best ethnological film, but it was initially put together as an installation in a art exhibition. We are developing productions as they have instigated the way we think about linear movies, in some way dialogues from merely certain impartial connections. It goes back to this Stephen Tyler notion, this discussion of representation and vocation. Some productions have experimented this evocation registry much more than the representative in explaining to say. This is very instigating. I think that this is the provocation. I think it's very instigating. Thinking about possibilities that are being opened. And I take the chance to invite you all to take a look at the closing conference from Schneider's last book, Expanded Visions, as it thinks strategies that are usually connected to video art and making them closer to the anthropological field. Initiatives from artistic fields and also by anthropologists having as intention this narrative ethnographic forum. And of course, some of the issues that Mauricio mentioned, and as I mentioned as well, but only to highlight this authorship issue with the partiality, with the quotations he made. The political issue, in a way that the vision issue, Mauricio talked about images and as they are seen. And it starts a lot of discussions in several fields. We should remember the Foucault classical discussion, talking about this game of perspectives, of looks that Velázquez constructs in the pictorial representation. But also Marilyn Saturn when they talk about expressivism and stressing the political point of view. We have to remember Laura Mulvey's works, classics about visual pleasure and narrative cinema, and the look as a male prerogative. adding a little layer to your reflections. And the images are seen and see, and the look that we exchange is also not destituted of a lot of political stances, and also about gender perspective, as Laura Mulvey and other authors mention. The relationship with music and sound. This is a parenthesis, as has been fruitful, these relationships with ethnomusicology and multimodal audiovisual anthropology as well. When I was showing this movie in RAI Film Festival in 2019, it was the first time, and if I'm not mistaken, that they gave this award for this ethnomusicology. Now they have this a specific category for this type of movies. And I highlight some efforts of researchers in theme project that I'm part of, which is called Musical Local, New Trails for Musicology, which is done at the Unicamp with USP and support. It's a huge project with 30 researchers in approximating this musicology, ethnomusicology, and multimodal anthropology. We have several works that have been focused on that, and with this team project that are using methodologies in the multimodal visual anthropology to think about ethnomusicology. So we highlight Jose Sachi's work, and they have produced a series of African immigrants that go to São Paulo and have a musical scene there. Alice Vielela's work as well, and Michael Echa as well. And several initiatives that we can see as approximation of these fields that I think that are interested to being mentioned. And we're talking about the visual anthropology journal, not the Chilean one. As in the first moment, there was a pioneerism, not only in the visual anthropology field, something that is being set on the network, and the potentialities it sets. Here in Brazil, we have talked a lot in the pandemic context. We have been mandatorily, we had to leave the comfort that some of us here as anthropologists in Brazil, we get used to our college environment. But in a politically tense context, we have been obliged to regain the public spaces to fight this pandemic of disinformation. And as we claimed this digital square, we started practicing this anthropology that is capable of communicating outside of the university's walls. And this is a bet we have been making with the Pierre Verger Award. The productions have huge potentiality because our texts are read more about our peers, but our films and photographies have possibility of gaining larger publics. So this is an opportunity for this digital square that we can claim our space. Not to go too long over the time here, to highlight the importance, I think Gaston allows us to say that about publications. in the field of visual anthropology. With the Visual Anthropology Journal, and in the Brazilian case, with the journal that was developed by from 1995, that was an important catalyzer, translating text from different languages. They were completely digitalized and they're made available, which is an operational role of these publications. And as a parallel, the importance of festivals as a PPV award in the consolidation of this field in different areas of anthropology that go to different paths. The awards, the festivals are key in the articulation of a field that we're calling multimodal visual anthropology. To wrap up, Gaston also talks about limitations in aesthetic point of view. And since 2016, we have published at USP. There's a journal which is the apple of our eyes. We created this journal in the attempt of outflowing production that didn't find consolidated space for publication due to their aesthetic limitations or other types of limitations. I changed the fonts in an article, for example, to have different text impacts. So when it went to be reviewed, it was all applied for Chicago style. So I had to redo the changing of fonts, the different fonts. Was a type of expression. So when we go to publicize on a journal, we have to adapt. And publications are also not used to dealing with this type of expressions. And with these initiatives, this is the closest example I have for myself. These initiatives are very important. As I said, in fact, I have talked more than I should. We have to close because there's the issue of the translators as well. I'd like to finish, of course, first thanking all of you, Gaston, Oscar, Alonso, Mauricio, for being here. I hope this is the first moment of other discussions will come. I hope you continue in the PPV with us. We still have a very intense week. And I'd like to invite all of you to go on the website and see the photographs and films, exhibitions, and to go on and follow the roundtables. So we are wrapping up here. Have a good day and good show. Thank you.